Swissair Flight 111. Swissair Flight 111 was supposed to be just another routine trip, a sleek MD-11 jet packed with 229 passengers and crew, flying from New York to Geneva. But on the night of September 2, 1998, something went terribly wrong. Less than an hour after takeoff, a strange smell filled the cockpit. At first, the pilots thought it was just the air conditioning acting up. But within minutes, smoke appeared, then disappeared, like a phantom warning of what was to come. At 10:24 p.m., the pilots sent out a pan-pan, Aviation's way of saying, "Hey, we've got an issue, but we're not in immediate danger." They were advised to land in Halifax, Nova Scotia, just 76 miles away. But as they prepared to dump fuel for a safer landing, the situation spiraled out of control. Smoke thickened, systems failed, and the plane's fate was sealed. At 10:31 p.m., Swissair Flight 111 crashed into the waters off Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, at almost full speed, breaking apart on impact. There were no survivors. The investigation revealed a chilling cause. Faulty electrical wiring had ignited the plane's flammable insulation, turning the aircraft into a flying fire trap. The final moments were catastrophic. 6 minutes before impact, the plane's black boxes stopped recording, a terrifying sign that total electrical failure had occurred. Among the wreckage, salvagers found valuable diamonds, jewelry, and even a Pablo Picasso painting, though only a fragment remained. This disaster reshaped aviation safety. Investigators pushed for stricter regulations on flammable materials in aircraft, but the haunting truth remains. 229 lives were lost, and for those final minutes, trapped in a burning aircraft, time must have felt like an eternity. Zambian Air Force AF-319. On April 27, 1993, tragedy struck the Zambian national football team in one of the most heartbreaking disasters in sports history. A de Havilland Canada DHC-5 Buffalo, operated by the Zambian Air Force, crashed into the Atlantic Ocean just minutes after taking off from Libreville, Gabon. All 30 people on board, including 18 players, the coaching staff, and crew members, perished. The flight was doomed from the start. After stopping in Brazzaville for refueling, engine issues were noted but ignored. Upon takeoff from Libreville, one engine caught fire. The fatigued pilot, relying on a faulty warning light, mistakenly shut down the wrong engine, sealing the fate of the plane and everyone on board. This wasn't just a team. It was a golden generation of Zambian football. They had already shocked the world by crushing Italy 4-0 at the 1988 Olympics, and their dream of qualifying for the 1994 World Cup seemed within reach. Among them was Godfrey Ukar-Chitalu, a legendary striker who had reportedly scored over 100 goals in a single season, more than Pelé or Messi ever did. Miraculously, 3 key players survived, not because they dodged fate, but because of the separate travel arrangements. Kalusha Bwalia, the team captain, was in the Netherlands playing for PSV Eindhoven. Charles Musonda, recovering from an injury, stayed in Belgium. Johnson Bwalia had a match in Switzerland. These 3 would later help rebuild the team. A decade later, in 2002, the Zambian government paid $4 million in compensation to the victims' families. But justice, that remains elusive. Calls for an official Zambian investigation have been met with silence. In a poetic twist, nearly 2 decades later, Zambia lifted the 2012 Africa Cup of Nations trophy in Libreville, just miles from where their fallen heroes met their end. A victory not just for football, but for history itself. Saudia Flight 163. Saudia Flight 163 is one of the most haunting aviation disasters in history, not because of the fire that broke out midair, but because every single person on board died after the plane had landed safely. It remains one of the deadliest accidents involving a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, and the worst aviation disaster in Saudi Arabia's history. On August 19, 1980, Flight 163 took off from Riyadh headed for Jeddah. Just minutes into the flight, smoke alarms warned of a fire in the rear cargo hold. Instead of immediately turning back, the flight crew spent critical minutes trying to confirm if there was an actual fire. By the time they decided to return, it was already too late. The plane landed safely at Riyadh International Airport. It taxied for nearly 3 minutes before coming to a stop, an eternity in an emergency. Fire crews arrived but found the engines still running, making it impossible to open the doors. 3 more minutes passed before the engine shut down, but by then, communication with the cockpit had gone silent. When rescuers finally forced the doors open, they were met with an eerie silence. Not a single soul had escaped. The entire cabin had been overcome by smoke. Autopsies later revealed that all 301 passengers and crew had died of smoke inhalation, likely before the doors could even be opened. The crew's failure to evacuate remains a mystery. Some speculate they struggled with the aircraft's pressurization systems. Others believed they were incapacitated by the smoke. In the wreckage, investigators found 2 butane stoves and a used fire extinguisher, but no conclusive evidence of what sparked the fire. What remains chilling is that everyone on board had time to escape, but no one made it out alive. South African Airways Flight 295, November 28, 1987. South African Airways Flight 295, known as Helderberg, left Taipei heading for Johannesburg with a stop in Mauritius. It never arrived. What started as a routine flight ended in one of aviation's most chilling and unresolved tragedies. At some point during the flight, believed to be during the beginning of its landing approach to Mauritius, an ominous message crackled over the radio. "We have a smoke problem in the airplane." Then, silence. Minutes later, the Boeing 747-200 Combi broke apart midair and plummeted into the Indian Ocean, 154 miles northeast of Mauritius. All 159 passengers and crew perished. But what caused the fire? Wreckage was found at an astonishing depth of 16,100 feet, far deeper than the Titanic. After an arduous search, investigators recovered the cockpit voice recorder, but the flight data recorder was never found. Without it, critical questions remained unanswered. The fire started in a front cargo pallet labeled as carrying computers and polystyrene packaging. Yet, evidence showed temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt a carbon fiber tennis racket in the wreckage. That's no ordinary cargo fire. At the time, South Africa was under an arms embargo. Whispers of illicit cargo, possibly ammonium perchlorate, a volatile rocket propellant, circulated. Was Flight 295 smuggling missile fuel? And if so, did authorities cover it up? The official report concluded that an intense fire weakened the aircraft structure, leading to its breakup. But the exact cause? Never identified. Families were left with more questions than answers. The Helderberg disaster changed aviation, leading to stricter cargo fire regulations. But one mystery lingers. Was this a tragic accident or a secret the apartheid government took to the grave? Nigeria Airways Flight 2120, July 11, 1991. What should have been a routine flight turned into one of the deadliest airline disasters in history. Nigeria Airways Flight 2120, operated by the now defunct nation Air Canada, was carrying 247 passengers and 14 crew members from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia to Sokoto, Nigeria. But just minutes after takeoff, disaster struck. The root cause? 2 underinflated tires. Mechanics had flagged the issue days before, but a project manager, desperate to keep the plane on schedule, ignored it. As the aircraft sped down the runway, one of the tires overheated and exploded. The friction from the damaged wheel ignited a fire, which went unnoticed because the DC-8 had no fire detection in that area. The moment the pilots retracted the landing gear, the burning rubber was pulled into the aircraft's hydraulic and electrical systems, turning a bad situation into an inescapable nightmare. The crew knew something was wrong, but couldn't pinpoint the problem. First Officer Kent Davidge even joked, "We got a flat tire, you figure?" But as the fire spread, systems failed one by one. Hydraulics, pressurization, flight controls. Flight attendant Kay Smith rushed into the cockpit, shouting, "Smoke in the back! Real bad!" Passengers in the cabin were already choking on thick black smoke, some burning alive as the floor beneath them melted. In a last desperate attempt, the pilots turned back toward the airport. They almost made it. Just 1.8 miles from the runway, the aircraft became uncontrollable and crashed, killing everyone on board. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a preventable disaster fueled by negligence. Nation Air Canada later went bankrupt, its owner pleading guilty to fraud. But for the 261 people who perished that day, justice came far too late. PIA Flight 740. It was a clear night over Saudi Arabia when Pakistan International Airlines Flight 740 took off from Jeddah carrying 145 Hajj pilgrims and 11 crew members back home to Karachi. But just 21 minutes into the flight, something went terribly wrong. A fire broke out in the rear cabin, and within moments, smoke began filling the aircraft. The crew, realizing the severity of the situation, requested an emergency descent, hoping to return to Jeddah. Then, at 2:03 a.m., the chilling words echoed through the radio, "Mayday! Mayday!" And then silence. The Boeing 707 plunged into the rocky terrain near Taif, Saudi Arabia, at an altitude of 3,000 feet. There were no survivors. This disaster remains one of the deadliest aviation tragedies on Saudi soil, among the worst involving a Boeing 707. What caused this catastrophe? Investigators pointed to an intense fire in the cabin. The most likely culprit? A gas or kerosene stove commonly used by Hajj pilgrims. A sudden drop in cabin pressure could have triggered a fuel leak, turning the aircraft into a flying inferno. Electrical malfunctions were also considered, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. Terrorism? Ruled out. There were no signs of explosives or sabotage. This tragedy eerily echoed another disaster, Saudia Flight 163, which caught fire mid-flight just 2 years later. The plane managed to land, but all 301 passengers and crew perished because the evacuation failed. Flight 740 was supposed to be a routine journey home, but instead, it became a haunting reminder of the dangers of onboard fires. To this day, the exact cause remains a mystery, buried underneath the ashes of one of aviation's most chilling disasters. China Northern Airlines Flight 6136. On May 7, 2002, China Northern Airlines Flight 6136 was cruising toward its destination, Dalianzhou Shuizi International Airport, when the unthinkable happened. At 21:20, the pilot's chilling message came through. Fire in cabin. The tail is on fire. 4 minutes later, the aircraft plunged into the Bohai Bay, killing all 112 people on board. The cause? Not an accident. Not a mechanical failure. It was arson. One of the passengers, Zhang Pilin, was drowning in debt and saw a grotesque way out: insurance fraud. Before boarding, Zhang purchased 7 air insurance policies totaling $170,000. But this wasn't some last-minute desperation move. He had flown from Dalian to Beijing and back on the same day, meticulously preparing. In the waiting area, security cameras caught him chain-smoking for hours, likely working up the nerve for what came next. Once on board, Zhang had smuggled gasoline in water bottles. Mid-flight, he set the cabin ablaze. Panic erupted. The pilot fought to control the plane, but the flames and toxic smoke overwhelmed the passengers and crew. Within minutes, the aircraft was lost. Rescue efforts were swift but futile. Chinese Navy ships and over 30 tugboats rushed to the site. Among the debris was a burned food cart, one of the first signs that the fire had doomed the plane. When investigators recovered the black boxes and examined Zhang's apartment, they found more gasoline bottles, cementing his role in the tragedy. This was no random act of terror. It was cold, calculated destruction for money, taking innocent lives with it. Zhang didn't survive to cash in on his twisted scheme, but his story remains one of aviation's darkest crimes. Aeroflot Flight 558. Aeroflot Flight 558 was a routine domestic flight from Karaganda to Moscow on August 31, 1972. But just 19 minutes after takeoff, the cockpit radio crackled with an ominous message. The smoke in the cockpit is very bad. Moments later, the pilot's final words was chillingly simple: goodbye. The aircraft, an Ilyushin IL-18V, plunged into a field just 14 miles from Magnitogorsk Airport, killing all 102 people on board. The cause? A deadly fire that originated in the cargo hold, set off by explosives inside passenger baggage. By the time the pilots attempted a desperate emergency landing, thick smoke had already overwhelmed the cabin. Panicked passengers rushed forward to escape the suffocating fumes, but their movement only worsened the situation, throwing off the plane's balance and making recovery impossible. When investigators combed through the wreckage, they found 4 unexploded shells among the charred remains. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was a disaster fueled by prohibited explosives stored recklessly in checked luggage. The fire spread so quickly that passengers succumbed to smoke inhalation before the plane even hit the ground. Only the pilots and navigator were killed on impact. Despite the horrifying nature of the crash, no memorial was ever built. Instead, the incident led to critical safety modifications on the IL-18, allowing access to the baggage compartment mid-flight, something that might have saved lives on Flight 558. This tragedy stands as a haunting reminder of how one mistake, one unchecked bag, can turn a routine flight into an airborne death trap. Air France Flight 4590. Air France Flight 4590 was supposed to be a routine luxury flight to New York, but fate had other plans. As the Concorde lined up for takeoff on July 25, 2000, no one on board knew that just minutes earlier, a Continental Airlines DC-10 had left behind a deadly trap, an unnoticed 17-inch titanium strip lying on the runway. At 185 miles per hour, the Concorde's left landing gear ran over the metal, slicing open a tire. A massive 9.9-pound chunk of rubber was hurled into the wing at 310 miles per hour. rupturing a fuel tank. Within seconds, leaking fuel ignited. The left wing was on fire. Engine 1 faltered, and the crew had no choice but to shut down Engine 2. The plane was still accelerating, but now it was crippled. The pilots, realizing they had no chance of making it back to the airport, aimed for Le Bourget, but the flames melted the wing's control surfaces. The Concorde, designed for supersonic speeds, not low-speed maneuvers, was now barely flying. Just 2 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft stalled, rolled left, and crashed into a hotel in Gonesse. All 109 people on board, plus 4 on the ground, were killed. Investigators traced it all back to that one strip of metal. French authorities fined Continental Airlines $271,628 and blamed a mechanic for using improper materials, though the conviction was overturned. The Concorde's design flaws became undeniable: fragile fuel tanks and tires prone to catastrophic failures. The jet returned in 2001 after modifications but never recovered from the stigma. By 2003, the Concorde was retired. One tiny piece of debris didn't just bring down a plane. It ended the era of commercial supersonic travel. If that DC-10 had taken off just minutes later, would Concorde still be flying today?